Let's now take you to this matter where the World Bank has approved South Africa's request for funding to repurpose Eskom's coal-fired Komati power station in Mpumalanga. The plant, which has been operating since 1961, had its final generating unit taken offline on Monday. The repurposing project will convert Komati into a renewable generation site powered with 150 megawatts of solar, 70 megawatts of wind and 150 megawatts of storage batteries. For more on this, we're joined by Chris Yelland, an energy analyst. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. This move has been lauded as a good step towards lowering carbon development. What makes it so significant?
Well, you may remember that this last week, Eskom announced the final closure of Komati Power Station. As the last unit was switched off and the whole power station has been brought to a close. Now, this power station is over 60 years old. It is well past its end of life. It is non-compliant with environmental and emissions, air pollution, water pollution, etc. And it is due for decommissioning. So there's a lot of jobs at stake here. Jobs that are people that were employed in the power station as well as in coal mines that are feeding coal to this power station. So this is really the beginning of South Africa's efforts towards a just energy transition, where the impact, the social, the economic, the political impacts of this transition are being dealt with. And it's part of a pilot project to repurpose Komati Power Station and to extend its life not as a coal power station but as a renewable energy and battery storage hub. And this, of course, is a kind of an experiment. Of course, there are going to be mistakes made along the way, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot to learn from these mistakes. But it's really important because this is the first of many power stations that are going to be decommissioned in the next 15 years. So Eskom has announced that something like 11,000 megawatts are going to be decommissioned by 2030 and a further 11,000 megawatts by 2035. That is more than half of the existing coal fleet. So how we deal with this matter and how we address just transitions, train people for new jobs, redeploy them, new manufacturing sectors, both manufacturing as well as in the electricity as well as in the agricultural sector, so-called agrovoltaics, where intensive agriculture can take place within solar PV farms. So this is all, I think, very good news, and the World Bank is funding it, giving preferential funding, lower cost than would be otherwise able to be obtained from commercial banks. So all in all, a good news story.
The process is, you make mention of the social challenges and what's at stake on that end, but it's also been looked at as an improvement in air quality within that area with this closure.
That's absolutely true. The health impacts of the burning of coal in this area, which is very intensive in terms of power generation, number of coal-fired power stations, all of which, by the way, do not comply with the laws of South Africa and can only operate by getting exemptions from this law, which they've done for year after year after year. So this is a step now towards the just transition, the decarbonization of this area, which will have significant health impacts. It won't happen immediately because this is a relatively small power station. It was built some 60 years ago, but it is a pilot plant and will give a lot of, I'm sure we'll gain a lot of experience as we move forward, and this experience will stand us in good stead for the decommissioning of some 22,000 megawatts of coal-fired power by 2035.
The high carbon intensity of the energy sector is something that has also been referred to as a challenge in efforts to reduce the greenhouse emissions, which is a challenge, a difficult challenge worldwide. I mean, how much attention will need to be placed on that?
Now, look, one has to work on these things continuously for a long time. It's not only carbon emissions. Carbon emissions, of course, contribute to climate change, but there are other emissions that are also extremely dangerous, affect human health, and I give you an example, sulfur dioxide, SO2. South Africa has very high sulfur content coal, and our emissions of sulfur dioxide from our coal-fired power stations are amongst the highest in the world. Now, other countries have been progressively dealing with this problem for many years, as we should have been doing, but we have not been doing that. So I give you an example. Some 20 years ago, China and the United States of America and Europe used to have high sulfur dioxide emissions. They have worked on this progressively over the last 20 years, and today they have very significantly reduced the sulfur dioxide emissions. To the extent where, just to put this in context, South Africa, Eskom, one utility, the national utility of South Africa, emits more sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere than all the power stations of the United States and China put together. That is how bad things are in this Highveld area of South Africa. And it also points to what can be achieved, not overnight, but by working on it steadily over 2 decades. And that's what we're going to have to do with sulfur dioxide, with carbon dioxide emissions, with nitrous oxide emissions, particulate emissions. All of these, we are one of the culprits of the world.
I mean, as you and I speak, we know that, load shedding has been implemented. We've been warned that it will be a dark weekend. What does this decommissioning process essentially speak to on a long-term basis in mitigating the challenge, the power crisis that we find ourselves in?
Well, the interesting thing is that we as South Africa are going to have to change our coal-fired power stations progressively over the next 20 years, not only because they emit a lot of pollution and sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide and particulates, but also because they happen to be coming to the end of their natural life. So we're going to have to replace them anyway. So it's a really fantastic opportunity now to replace them with the latest state-of-the-art clean technologies. And that is exactly what this pilot is doing. It's replacing a dirty, thirsty, non-compliant, dangerous, unhealthy power station with something that is cleaner, that does not emit emissions, that is going to create new kinds of jobs, not only in the power generation field, but also in the agricultural sector, in the water sector, in the manufacturing sector. So we're going to have to do this change anyway. So this is a unique opportunity for South Africa. It's not as though these plants have a long life ahead of them. No, exactly the opposite. They need to be changed anyway.
Very well. Thank you so much for that. Energy analyst Chris Yelland speaking to the decommissioning process of the Komati power station.